This is Jim Morenz of the XchangeCore Community, and want to welcome all of you today. As you saw in the announcement of this webinar, we've had really an incredible number of people join up and become part of the XchangeCore Community. Well over 1,000 were added to the 4,000 that we had a couple of years ago when we became the official XchangeCore Community after the graduation from the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate program. And in talking to, being out at conferences recently across the country, talking to some folks, they said, gee, could you bring it all together? So I decided to create this webinar that sort of summarizes everything and where we've been over the last couple of years and put it in the light of FEMA's concept of the whole community and how it is necessary to bring everyone together to be able to more effectively create a resilient community. And the way that I've structured this is to look at XchangeCore and really information exchange in general as the foundation of the whole community. So we'll define the whole community, then start to take a look at information exchange and where the big gaps exist in how you bring together all the disparate parts of the whole community. And the content that's needed before, during, and after an emergency, problems that exist today, and how we can go about solving those problems, with XchangeCore being one very, very important foundational contributor. So with that said, let's go take a look at the whole community. The whole community originated in a concept that Craig Fugate, who's the administrator of FEMA and has been for almost the last 8 years, originated first in Florida, and as the state director in Florida had a clear understanding of what it took to run emergency management. And the whole community says everybody's got to be involved. Certainly all levels of government, but you can't leave it to government. All the voluntary agencies, faith-based organizations, private sector businesses, and critical infrastructure, right down to the citizens, that it's absolutely essential that all of these people are effectively using the same principles and procedures to go about protecting their own little part of the community, or big part. The whole community emphasized the community nature of this and a shared responsibility and the importance of collaboration. In order to foster resiliency, this community-oriented approach had to be put in place because America can't simply afford to continue to just respond to emergencies. We have to build sustainable and resilient communities. There are some operational improvements that took place in FEMA. The creation of the National Business Emergency Operations Center has brought in that private sector that represents more than 80% of all of our critical infrastructure, retail organizations, and others. For those with special needs, the Office of Disability Integration was created. And in reaching out to that volunteer community in many different ways, there was one very critical issue that had existed for years, and that was in the mass care operations. And FEMA in recent years has been able to work with the American Red Cross to establish a way to co-lead the mass care operations. So some of these very specific things, and there are many others, but I just wanted to pick these out because these reflect back on who the whole community is. It's government, volunteers, it's private sector businesses, and ultimately down to the citizens. So with that as background, why do I think information exchange is the foundation for the whole community? Everything that rides on top of sharing information is a absolutely enabling portion of building the whole community. That information at the basis allows everything else to take place. And this is even reflected in, if you note down at the bottom, document, Whole Community Approach to Emergency Management, Principles and Themes and Pathways for Action. Out of page 22, this set of phrases reflects the fact that information exchange is one of the foundational elements. So, the whole community has to provide adequate information to organizations ahead of time, very important concept, as well as during the disasters, so they can prevent, protect, mitigate, respond to, and recover from threats and hazards. Right at the beginning, the document says you need better information. Secondly, if you do that, this is a trade. If you do that, organizations will provide you with the information on their status and their ability to assist when you need them. This speaking to government. But really, it's the entire phrase. Government should be saying what its status is and how it can respond to the public as well. The document goes on to say, for this reason, you have to have ongoing, multi-dimensional information sharing. It's one of the most important aspects of maintaining partnerships. And they're talking about meetings, they're talking about documentation, and they're talking about data exchanges, which is our focus. This whole idea of putting information in says you have to provide for the private sector organizations in development of business continuity plans, another component of the information, because keeping those businesses up and running after an event stabilizes the economy and promotes further resiliency. So out of that, those set of phrases really come the basis for making the claim that information exchange is the foundation of the whole community, and as a result produces a couple of operational necessities for that community. Those operational necessities, I think you can summarize in two ways, two sides of it. Members of the community seamlessly provide the status and capabilities of what it is that they serve to the community. And on the other side, members of the community also express their needs from the community to sustain or restore their ability to serve the community. So on the left-hand side, we have those who can continue to provide, and on the right-hand side, the needs expressed in order to get back to being a productive part of the community. And in those two phrases, I suggest, you can define everything from government. How am I going to provide? Are there support requirements that are needed at a local government agent level from a state, at a state level from the federal government? That's whole government exchange is on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you could have a school. We are able to provide shelter, or we need electricity. Each of the members of the community are exchanging that information back and forth about themselves and their service to the community. Thus, the most essential distinction between lots of other programs that have taken place and XchangeCore is the ability to provide that two-way exchange, because without that exchange of status and capabilities, needs to sustain and restore, you end up with not collaboration, but dictation of what people should be doing, which does not lead to community. So if I have that two-way exchange, there's one other element that is absolutely essential, and that's the transparent sharing of appropriate portions of that two-way exchange. And that combination of two-way exchange and a one-way sharing is reflected in XchangeCore, has been from the very beginning. The ability of XchangeCore to move that information two-way and as well to share it out there. Noting, just as quick background, that XchangeCore was developed by the Department of Homeland Security in the Directorate of Science and Technology. It graduated from science and technology, had 2 years of support from the Department of Defense that took the XchangeCore technology and crafted it into something that the DoD calls Keystone. And Keystone is XchangeCore certified to operate on the .mil network for military exchange. And as we move through here, that military component, National Guard, this is one of the very, very rare opportunities to seamlessly move information from a military environment out to a civilian environment. As well, after the DoD transition, we have moved into the XchangeCore community that has brought in the private sector. And that private sector, thus, it now allows us to be able to deliver this in a completely open source way, freely, to all the members of the whole community. So that initial development by DHS, the enhancements that were made by the military for their own uses that have now fed back into this private sector nonprofit that is running XchangeCore, allow all of this to take place. When I then look at what kind of information I want to have and how I'm going to make this collaborative yet independent decision-making based on this, I've got a couple of components. Because what I want to accomplish out of all that information for all those organizations is very clear. First, I want to narrow the focus. There's a ton of information out there. This technology-rich world has created a rich information environment, and it's absolutely critical that a tool like XchangeCore be able to define an area of interest so that I know that, for example, there are 3 schools affected, not that there are 3,000 schools in the state. Secondly, I need to be able to marry up geospatial information and non-geospatial information, but make certain that it always is associated with a space. So even if I have a plan or a checklist or a set of procedures, I want to know that those things, those documents, are currently being used at this place, at this time. So that ability to gravitate information that doesn't belong on a map, to associate it with something, a map reference that allows me to do that, the vertical part, the transparent sharing, which is most often done, as we'll see in a little bit, in something called a common operating picture. The right-hand side, one of our other absolute essential components to make certain that every application is acting on the same information. With the rapid flow of information, we absolutely cannot afford not to have people having the same information to make their decisions. It has to be current and identical data. It has to be simultaneously available to all the organizations. Has to be continuously accessible on demand. If I miss something, I need to be able to go back and get it. Has to be translatable to the applications that I want to use. And there have to be rules to share it. That really is the fundamental set of ways that we can go about filling the void that exists in the whole community information sharing. And what does that get us? It gets us literally everybody reading off the same sheet of music. Because if we're not doing that, we're not solving problems, we're not saving all the lives that we could, we're not protecting the environment, and we're not getting businesses and people back to normalcy as quickly as possible. Information exchange allows us to do that. So let's take a little bit of a look now, a specific look at the information exchange gap that exists today. And what I'd like to do is be able to go through, and let's take one component, infrastructure in the community, which might be utilities. it's food and medicine, it's all the supply chain that results in people living and working. And that'll illustrate this gap that we have. Community infrastructure takes care of its own supply problems. If there's a disruption and a Walmart has to close for a few hours, they resolve that problem themselves. When there's an electrical outage for a few homes, the utility comes and fixes that. Everything related to most of the community life gets resolved with its own resources. Unless something impacts public safety. When that utility outage happens and a hospital is suddenly put on generator power and is not going to be able to support certain types of operations, that's a problem. When a gas line ruptures and it causes a fire or a toxic release, that's a problem. And if suddenly we have an inability to deliver foods or medicines because we've got floodwaters in Houston, that's a public safety problem. So that community infrastructure operates nicely until there's an impact on public safety. When that happens, that's when government resources become involved. There are responders, there are supporters, there's sheltering, there are all the evacuation, all the other things that you understand. But it's that interplay between the two around the ability to meet a need of the community that is where we want to focus. At the same time, government responds to public safety problems. It puts that fire out at a single house. It's going to help us evacuate from a hurricane or have rescues because that's what government organizations do. Those things, though, can impact the community infrastructure. If there's a utility outage because of the way government responds, or if an evacuation causes food and medicine not to be able to be transported into operating stores, then again we see the reflection of this gap that is caused by a lack of information. So sharing incident and response information becomes absolutely critical. And we do it. Sure. We've been doing it for years. We've been doing it since Hannibal crossed the Alps. Not with the phone and fax as we do now, but there were messengers that were running back and forth to say, hey, here's the community infrastructure, here's the government, and here's how we're going to play back and forth our attempts to make those major journeys and logistical travels. Now, we see things like somebody from the utilities physically going to an emergency operations center and sitting there throughout the entire course of an emergency to do one specific thing. And that is when somebody in the EOC says, how's our utility doing? Person picks up the phone and calls their utility group and asks, how's our utilities doing? The utilities, others, companies publish websites, and the media are available to provide that information. All those things have information passing back and forth. But it would be better if we actually use the technology that's available, that each side uses on its own. There are outage management systems and crew dispatches, public awareness at websites. And on the government side, we've got resources and incident management and common operating pictures. Wouldn't it be better if we didn't have to have somebody sitting there saying, oh, something's out at 4th and Main Street? If I could see that in my government system and not have to ask that question. Well, therein lies the gap. And the gap is there because that's a pretty complicated mess that I end up creating when everybody needs to connect with everybody else, and I want to see your things and you want to see my things, and let's create this nice little link that allows us to see them back and forth. That's tough. And when this doesn't happen every day, remember, this is unusual operation, not the daily operation of the community, where the community infrastructure on the left and government on the right is taking care of their own business. That's where XchangeCore comes in. That's where XchangeCore comes in to provide two-way sharing of incident and response information. And it allows you to structure that response so that it's not just passing a bunch of information, but in fact that information is orchestrated around the key information that we need to see. So I can understand and share through XchangeCore certain things to certain groups. I'm going to get public awareness about the food and medicine is going to go straight over to my incident management group. But you know what? My common operating picture doesn't get shared out to anybody, but my resources, you see the picture. The ability to use that center repository to share the information becomes absolutely critical to creating the whole community response. And in doing that, we effectively create this two-way flow of information that then gets shared to everybody else, creating an ongoing picture of the community public safety that helps to minimize problems in the operation. And from the other side, to understand outage and dispatch and all the other vagaries that exist in the commercial sector and how to anticipate events that might be occurring. So that gap is where we are going to focus. Well, what's that gap consist of? Well, first of all, we want to take a look at the information type that is critical to this. Every community, when something is going on, needs to know what it is and where it is. There's a problem here. Let's expose that. And those are the first things that anybody asks when you hear a tweet or you hear something on the news is, what are we talking about? Where is it? Second component of this whole community information is who is in charge, who should know. That combination of people who are already operating and who also need to be told to be brought into allows me to share the extent of the knowledge of what's going on with that whole community. Then the natural question is going to be, what's the impact? How am I getting understanding of what's happening from a whole different set of tools that I have out there? And what are we doing about it? What's the response at this particular time? Who's doing what? How close are we to solving this problem? Because if I'm not solving the problem, then I probably need to identify more people, alert them to the fact that we're going to need more to help resolve this problem. And then finally, the last couple of things, got to constantly be saying, what's happening now? What's happening now? I need that situational awareness, that common operating picture. I'm going to get a shift change briefing. And if you think of that, that's going to happen in Emergency Operations Center. But who else needs to know that information? Certainly now, we mentioned before the collaborative relationship between the American Red Cross and FEMA in mass care. That shift change briefing needs to be shared between those two. And if you look down, it's probably going to be others in the public and private sector who will need that same thing. So common piece of information that we're always going to want to have is what's happening now. And last piece, what's planned next? Who's going to be doing what in the near future, my next action planning period? Those components we call common operational data. This is the essential set of information that needs to be created around any problem, any incident that we have. And one of the parallel to this is something called essential elements of information, which generally end up being bigger clusters of explanation of what's happening that are made up of these specific pieces of content. So this common operational data I consider to be the core. If XchangeCore and information exchange are the foundation, these are the bricks that you use to build the foundation for the whole community. So we'll come back to this set of common operational data, because we need to take a look at where that data sits today and what our problem is associated with the whole community use of information. So the problem of the whole community is organizing and exchanging that common operational data. If we look at it today, it was quoted recently that there are 90,000 layers of geospatial data that some folks in the National Guard think are useful to know about. That's pretty tough to be able to make sense out of that. There are dozens of different geospatial formats. There are hundreds of non-geospatial formats. Think of every application that's out there, your web EOCs, your spot-on response, or knowledge center, or A-team, all have different formats for the information they're dealing with. And there are many, many standards in both geospatial and non-geospatial. And all of this has to get out there, has to become part of this data community. And there are many different ways that that data exists. Some of it in a nice, clean web service that I could go off and get permissions to connect with. Others have an application programming interface that say, yeah, if you write a little program, I'll let you look at my data. And others are just pure databases that you have to really do some grinding to be able to get into. So the problem exists not that I haven't created the data, but rather that there is so much of it, and so much of it is highly transactional. In my emergency, what happened 5 minutes ago is not useful to me right now. So the problem that we're facing is organizing and exchanging. But the problem is accentuated by that, by saying, and I want to know it right now, right here at this place in time. So those 90,000 layers of geospatial data become really an obstacle. I need to know which ones are right there. If I don't have that at my fingertips, I'm going to be in trouble. But as well, the problem is I need this person or this person or this person represented by those little circles there. I need them to know that data about that place at this time. You see the complexity. And that complexity is really reflected in the age-old problem getting the right information to the right person at the right time. Now we're saying we need to go across this entire community of very different kinds of organizations. Remember, they were government, they were volunteers, they were faith-based, they were private sector, they were critical infrastructure, and they were the public. Across that entire community, in an age when we have high technology expectations. Look at your phone. Does that set an expectation for what we as government and the community ought to be able to deliver in an emergency, a pretty important time? I'd say yes. So the solution. Solution, as I mentioned, started with the Department of Homeland Security, enhanced by the Department of Defense, further enhanced by the private sector, is XchangeCore Web Service Data Orchestration. Now that's a lot of nouns sitting right there that we want to take a look at. So the answer is this Web Service Data Orchestration, which by definition is the process of integrating two or more applications and or services together. So I'm integrating stuff together to automate, to make it go faster, to make it go smoother without human intervention, a process, or to synchronize data in real time. Isn't that what we wanted? All the way back to those set of bullets that were taken out of the whole community report basically said, I want to bring things together, make it fast and seamless, and make certain that we all have the right information now. So how do we do that? 5 components. 1, you translate. You translate web services data formats into a common format. That common format is the National Information Exchange Model, created by the Department of Homeland Security, adopted by the Department of Defense, promulgated to virtually every other federal agency, and it helps to define what sets of data I want to move back and forth. But it has to be translated from web services that do not provide that format. We have to transform non-web service data formats into that common data format. We got a translation, we got a transformation, and then we need to package. We need to package common operational data into what we call content packages that are relevant for the consumers. Because, as we'll see, I don't want to have people who don't care about the information getting the information, and I don't want those who do care about the information getting extraneous information. And it has to be done securely. And by secure, I don't mean military levels of security or DHS levels of security. I mean the level of confidence that the information gets delivered and that it gets delivered to the person or group that I intend. So it's as much control of my data when I exchange it with others as it is the security of data at rest, security, data in transit, all those components that your IT department will want to talk about, but those are taken care of. XchangeCore gets wrapped into those security components. And just a quick aside, XchangeCore was certified to operate on the Department of Homeland Security secure networks and has a current authority to operate on the .mil military networks. So if you want to talk about security of the software itself, it's passed all the tests. 5th of these items in web service data orchestration is that data needs to be synchronized in real time so that every application that's connected into XchangeCore can be assured that they have current data and that we can be assured as a community that there's consistent data across the entire Exchange community. Absolutely critical. Translate, transform, package, secure, and synchronize. That's what XchangeCore does, and that's what web service data orchestration is. So how does it all work? What's a life cycle look like? Well, let's say we got up, it's going to start up in the upper left-hand corner, and I got a bunch of data sources there. Those data sources might be a geospatial web service that's pushing out some information. Think of it as the National Geological Survey's information about earthquakes, or NOAA's information about hurricanes and weather that's moving. You've got non-geospatial web services. You've got non-web services, and you've got API-based operational data. So you see 2 things there. One is geospatial data, and one of them is operational data. And the operational data are the plans and the procedures and the checklists and the assignments and the personnel and all those things that you do to manage an emergency. And then you say, gee, let's look at that on a map. That's the data. That whole range of data is what you bring into XchangeCore and translate or transform that into common operational data. And by doing that, we array that information into building this foundation of information that helps to support the whole community. That common operational data is then composed into these content packages. And this content packages says, I have a problem right here at this geospace. I have these organizations who are responding to it. We have these resources at the scene, and these resources are staged over at this location, and we notified these organizations or people about this problem. So that's an example. If you go back to that common operational data of where is it, what resources are, those are the pieces of information that we compose into these content packages. There are then agreements that are made that allow the consuming applications to agree we're going to share the information. I have to say I'm going to share it to you. This is what I'm going to share. You have to say I'm going to take it from you, and I appreciate it. Hopefully you say you appreciate it. That's the two-way set of the two-way set of agreements that allow those content packages that started over there in the upper left-hand corner as data sources are now composed into valuable pieces of information. Allow them to be shared. When they begin the exchange process, notification goes out to the approved subscribing applications to synchronize the content. They say, hey, here's new information. Come get it. Come look at it. When they do that, next one over on the left-hand side, you then enable these applications to have that data to process it, visualize it, and improve it. And then to complete the cycle, the data is then exposed for further exchange in its native format, and it becomes a data source, which might be a web service or non-web service or API, whatever it, however it is used by that application. It then can become part of the data sources and go through the cycle again. So I say I have a problem here. You say you have a vehicle that's going to respond to it. They say they're going to notify their bosses because they might need to evacuate that area. This is the conversation that takes place. And it is a conversation that supports the decision-making process, which is going to be a couple of people sitting there saying, hey, are you going to evacuate? Yes, I'm going to evacuate. But it makes certain that they have all the right information. And when that evacuation decision is made, that all the right organizations have heard it at the same time. Thus, XchangeCore creates value for information. Each one of those components, the translate, transform, package, they all have a very specific value. The translation allows us to create a two-way exchange, not just looking at something, but being able to move the information back and forth. It allows us to bring non-web service, non-geospatial information into this common operational data, compose that data, those packages, so that you can deliver relevant results so you don't make people go out and have to discover that that evacuation order was given, but rather it's delivered to them. Security of that delivery is assured that you're only passing it between authorized applications. And the synchronization is absolutely critical because it means I know, and the value of currency and consistency is unimaginable in making critical life-saving decisions. So why does it work for the whole community? Well, it does it because one view of incident content can't satisfy all people. I'm operating a voluntary organization that's trying to make a decision about whether to take this group of disabled people out of harm's way. I don't need the same kind of information that the fire department or the police department needs about whether they're going to issue an evacuation order. Very different kinds of information needed across that community. Very different ways to look at it. You don't want to have to force everybody to look at the same thing. You have to give them a way to look at what's valuable for them. And the only way you can accomplish that is by having standardized data and managing the content to be able to put it into anybody's chosen application, whether it's on a phone, whether it's in a computer, or whether it's in Emergency Operations Center. The common data gets exposed to whatever way they want to look at it. Plus, the community is not a dictatorship. The community is collaborative. So you must allow two-way communications so that one decision maker with their special view that satisfies only them can share other information with other decision makers who look at it in their own view and then respond. And that XchangeCore translates those views back and forth because it is only moving the common operational data. And to XchangeCore, every viewer, whatever that application might be, is completely agnostic. We, XchangeCore, don't care. So the goal then, and why XchangeCore works, is because we can deliver multiple different decision makers anywhere that they exist, on any device that they have, using their own application, which is why I can tell you that it can go on a phone, because they're already using a phone for an application that can connect to XchangeCore. The common data that allows them to see their view of everything that's happening. Why is it effective as well? Well, traditionally, what I just described looks a little bit like this. You got data out there, and I'm looking at it up at the top. And what I do, and you have it on your phone right now, you connect to this application and this piece of data and this piece of data and this different application, this piece of data. Is there any way that you bring them together? No. You've got effectively all this. You and your family have all this going on to the same data. Somebody's looking at it in Twitter, somebody's looking at it in Facebook, somebody's looking at it on WebUC, somebody's looking at it on ArcGIS Online. This is a very complex way to try to run the railroad, a very difficult and complex, complicated way to use all those different applications. So somebody came up with a great idea, and it is a great idea. It's called a common operating picture. And that is, what I'm going to do is take all that different data there, and I'm going to put it into the map. So everybody can see it, and everybody understands maps. I got red stuff happening there, I got blue stuff happening on the left, and then I'm going to give that map to everybody. Well, great idea. Absolutely critical component of the applications that are available. But it doesn't solve everything for the whole community, because the whole community doesn't adhere to a single operating principle. So saying, hey, here's the way I want you to look at my data, is imposing things on the community, and that really defeats the purpose of the community. At a technical level, that common operating picture, it can have some problems scaling to a really major incident, because you have many connections going out to all those different data sources. And there's a volume of data, and it's essentially not collaboration. It's looking at a picture that somebody else has drawn for you, which again, if I'm trying to decide whether to evacuate a school or to shelter in place, I'm not going to have the same picture that FEMA has. The third problem with common operating pictures is some percentage of the time you're answering the wrong question, because common isn't common to everybody. There are different roles, there are different pictures necessary. So, there have been some great minds that have addressed this. And one of them, John Contestable of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, has looked extensively at interoperability. And he suggests that the way to do this is to have all those individual pieces of data published once out to what he calls an integration layer tool. That integration layer then can compose the data and make it available to all the other tools at what is called a presentation layer. They're all standards-based, they're open architecture, they're secure in nature, and all of those things are embodied in XchangeCore. John Contestable's view right here of the presentation layer, the integration layer, all the different things that can be in that integration layer, all of them allowing information to be exchanged horizontally through that integration layer and then provided up to the presentation layer is where XchangeCore sits. So from an information technology architecture, a very, very firm basis for XchangeCore, which works in the following way. Every jurisdiction or end user application owns their own data. And they have that data, they're using it in some application, computer-aided dispatch, WebUC, you name it. XchangeCore allows that organization to create some piece of that data that they want to share. We call it fractional data because I don't want to know everything about that dispatch. I don't know when the vehicle was last had its oil changed. I just want to know where it is. So XchangeCore takes whatever is the appropriate piece of the data there, creates a digest of it that basically says who, what, and when, who, what, when, and where, and then exposes it out, shares it out, as we saw earlier, to other organizations. And it does that using standards. It does that using automated notifications so that I understand who's doing what to make sure it's current. Those standards are absolutely essential to making things work, because if I don't understand what the data is inside of XchangeCore and can't publish the way that it is structured, you're not going to be able to create this whole community information exchange. So here you see the standards, the National Information Exchange Model, or Emergency Data Exchange Language, which has increasingly become part of NEAM, the Open Geospatial Consortium's standards for sensors and the OTC map context and others. All these components, and there are others that aren't on here, all these components are what sits inside of XchangeCore to take that external data, transform it into this very valuable format, and thus expose it to people and not have them have to figure it out, but rather say, I understand you're using this component that comes out of NEAM. I understand what it means. A real quick picture of what this thing looks like, this XchangeCore, is you start out with an application on the right-hand side that does a whole bunch of different things. And they build this adapter or connector that sits in the middle. And this isn't something you do. This is something companies do. Sometimes governments do. City of Las Vegas recently built one of these because they couldn't get their application company. They wanted too much money, or they couldn't get them to do it, or whatever. So it's something that you build, and there's a huge amount of example code that allow people to be able to build this information exchange method. And that adapter in the center then goes over here to the actual core itself that consists of a bunch of services that produce work products that then are shared back, notified, work products get shared back, and the cycle that you saw earlier, that life cycle of pushing information around, takes place using this set of structures that are all transparent to you. This is a set of software code that you can download freely and either install it on your local network, install it out on the cloud, or there are even cloud service providers that offer this as a service for some dollars a month. So there's no stumbling block to being able to get this little chart showing up. Here, just talk you through this very quickly, a simple example of the way things work. Over here, we've got the incident application and its connector. The right-hand side, a GIS application, just for example, with XchangeCore in the middle. So we create an incident over here in XchangeCore, which creates the work product. When that happens, both the incident application and the GIS application get notifications to it and can get that information. So they get the incident work product. They also get the associated map work product that was made when that first incident work product was created. Over here on the GIS side, they say, oh, great, I see where this incident is. I've got this map work product, and I see they don't have an evacuation route. I'm going to create an evacuation route. I'm going to update the map work product, send it back to XchangeCore here in the middle. What does that do? Well, it spawns notifications. So the GIS application is going to get confirmation, and the incident application is going to get a notification. And then they're going to say, oh, let me see that. So they get the map work product, and over here on the incident application, they're going to now view this evacuation route. It's a very straightforward process of each application, an organization running that application, doing what they do best and sharing that information. And it's all done securely with a set of secure agreements that allow me to define who gets what information, where that information goes, incident proximity, so that I can share the information based on proximity in a number of different ways. And it gets shared out in a relationship that allows us to have a whole bunch of applications connected to a single core, and each one of them become a trusted peer, or have two sets of trusted peers who are going to exchange information based on their agreements. So it's sort of a trusted peer in each case, and maybe I would call them neighboring peers next. And then I go out even further, and here I create a set of virtual cores on a single physical core, and there my peer-to-peer-to-peer relationship might be trusted peers to neighboring peers to regional peers. And then finally, I can build a cloud-based virtual peer deployment that allows me to really create any type of information sharing design that you want to have, and do it by reducing your operations and maintenance costs using this concept of cloud-based regional exchange cores. And what you end up with then is the whole community information sitting in the middle in XchangeCore. But on the left-hand side, our responder organizations only get the information that they've agreed to get. And the critical infrastructure group is only going to get the information that they have by agreement. Volunteers are only going to get their information. Private sectors are only going to get and give their information and know exactly where it's going. And that question of where it's going is one that I want to take you through to wrap this up, because you have to consider security and control. As I mentioned before, control really is what we want to focus on. Because data owners have to control the data replication, which is really what this peer-to-peer network does. It replicates data so that everybody has the most current information. Spent a lot of time protecting this information. Now we say, oh, gee, let's share it. So let me show you how we protect it. End user has access control. This means that you are using your own application, and the only way you can ever see XchangeCore information is data selection control. You have given access even when you to go and someone create that, to see your own application product through XchangeCore. You can say, I don't even want to give what is available to me. We have security in exchanging that information, SSL authorization, which is as good as your bank uses. You then have a profile service that controls the sharing, that says, okay, now who's going to get this information? Coming out the other side, you have that same authentication that takes place securely. And then finally over here, I have ingest control. I have an organization that says, you know what, I actually don't even want to see some of that information that you're willing to share. I don't want to know, I don't want to know which dispatches you had for domestic abuse cases, because I'm just a plain old emergency organization over here. I just don't want to see that information. So you can filter that information out and not even take it. And finally, I'm secure because nobody gets to that data unless they have end-user access control. But now we add more cores to it. I still have those bilateral information sharing agreements. I'm going to prevent certain people from getting it. I'm going to allow certain other people to get it through these sharing agreements. And the net result is going to be that I'm going to be able to share fractional data to the right people that I want to without needing to do anything outside of XchangeCore. It takes care of that entire sharing responsibility. These are all really long, so I'm not going to talk about them except to say loss estimation. Encourage you, we'll have these up on the website, to read through these, because these really are cases on how to find exactly the right place to insert XchangeCore to make the most effective use of resource deployment, of incident information sharing, of the public-private donations management, of school safety. All these have components that allow us to insert at key pivot points where XchangeCore will make a difference. So how do we proceed? It's very easy. XchangeCore is available. Source code on GitHub. Request an executable version from us. But what you need to do is prioritize across your whole community who wants to say what to whom. Work on the integration side with us and with your application vendor. Gets put out on the cloud. Training, operation, exercise. It becomes part of what you do. XchangeCore is not something new. It's what you do every day. Takeaway message for you. XchangeCore for the whole community enables exchange. It assures currency to make certain that all the notifications of applications are received. Provides the security and control that we just talked about. Delivers collaboration. Most importantly, manages the content so that you're only getting what you need and want. Does all this with no new end-user software. You're not buying anything for your everybody to look at, meaning there's no training. They're using their existing applications, and it's already been paid for. So with XchangeCore, you are better informed, and all your partners are better informed. Bottom line, available now. Now, I didn't allow much time for questions on that one as we came up on 1 o'clock, which is our stated ending time, but I'm happy to hear from anybody.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, sir. Real quick, NEAM 3.2, is XchangeCore going to adopt, or what's their input on the comment period?
Oh, definitely the intention is to adopt. The way that gets done is through the community, so we will be looking for community participation in doing that. The way that XchangeCore is built is that you can insert the payload, which is what NEAM is, the payload into an existing XchangeCore work product. So there's really no programming that is necessary to adopt the new NEAM structure. Rather, we need people to create those content packages out of NEAM, and we then insert them into the existing structure. So a very, very flexible way for that kind of an upgrade to take place. So we endorse it wholeheartedly, and looking for the community to begin building those packages. So wish everybody a good month, and we will talk then. Thanks everybody for participating. Bye now.